We're gonna start on time today. Yay! We're calling the meeting to order at 2:30 p.m. on the dot.
Dang.
So proud of myself.
It's a strict day today.
Places to go, you can see. So this is the August 10th, 2017 of the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee meeting. And we do the roll call. Mr. Young?
Here.
Mr. Lehman?
Present.
Mr. Mendo?
Here.
Ms. Buck? Here. Mr. Henson?
Here.
And Mr. Rudolph is sitting in for Mr. Baton.
Here.
We do have quorum. Craig, would you mind doing that announcement?
Yeah, all AMATS meetings are open to the public, and the public is invited to comment. We have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or a consultant, and the committee will be given a chance to discuss it, and then at that point, the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you very much. All right, first item is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved by Mr. Linehan, second by Mr. Van Ho. Are there any objections?
One correction. We will not be having informational item 6A, the Stewart Highway on Mountain Road to Diamond Boulevard. That'll be here next month.
We get discount-
Gentlemen, okay with the,
If we get discount on our admission for, yes.
all right, any objections to the modification? Any objections to approval of the agenda with modification? All right, hearing none, the agenda is approved. All right, we do have meeting minutes for us.
Move to
Are we
approve.
on? Moved by Mr. Linehan.
Not so much for that.
Seconded by Mr. Van Ho. Are we all caught up?
We are.
We are, because we didn't have a meeting one month, correct? All right. Amy, remember, it was nice. All right, are there any objections to approval of the minutes? Hearing none, those are approved. Moving right along today. All right, first item for us is action item 5A, the Citizens Advisory Committee District 3 appointment for Steve Horn.
So, the Citizens Advisory Committee has 6 seats that are representative for each assembly district. Our district seat member had to resign due to work obligations, and so we were looking for someone to fill this seat. And fortunately, Mr. Steve Horn had applied previously and was still interested. He had not enough to do with his time, and we're going to fill that up, and he is here today, but we're happy to recommend him to the TAC for your recommendation of policy for it to be on the committee.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the public? Would you like to say anything?
Very brief. I've been living in West Rank Acres for 30 some odd years and have a long background in transportation and a continued interest in transportation issues, and very interested in serving on the committee. So I look forward to it. Thanks.
Hearing no other public comment, then otherwise the committee.
I guess I'll move for approval. I don't know why, but I guess I will, Steve.
Thanks, Jerry.
Moved by Mr. Hanson, seconded by Mr. Van Ho. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we are so. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, the next item before us is the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, text memo 1A.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Adrienne Underwood. I'm Senior Transportation Planner with AMATS, and I'm the Project Manager for the MTP 2040 update. Just as a quick reminder, this update is, we're updating this document that was produced in 2012, 2035 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. and it makes recommendations for road, non-motorized, and transit demand management, transit system management recommendations. So this is our schedule for milestones, and where we are right now, we're still in the issue identification phase. So we're right here still. And the next big push after this is going to be looking at alternatives and alternatives development, but we're not there yet. We still have a lot more to do. So what we're going to do is, what we hope to do today is ask you to please consider and ask you to review and approve Tech Memo 1A, which is goals, objectives, and performance measures. And for this item, you have a memo, you have a revision to Tech Memo 1A, which includes with track changes that are identified in the memo, to show you the changes that staff is recommending in the comment response summary that we've also attached here. We've had, this document was initially approved by the Technical Advisory Committee on May 11th, and then we got some requests from certain members of the public that they felt they really wanted an opportunity to review it as well. So we went above and beyond our public involvement to put this document out for review and comment for 30 days, which ended on July 4th. We got 81 comments. We were received from 3 citizens, Anchorage Citizens Coalition and Rabbit Creek Community Council, and 1 comment from the Public Transportation Department. So we did get a lot of good comments that were very valuable. Many of them are more at the policy level, and we're going to carry those forward to the last chapter, which was the implementation plan, to talk about policies. There were some good comments for various things too, but we got a lot of repetition actually with some of the comments, and a lot of them are already covered in the Tech Memo. So the issue response summary, we wanted to make people feel that we had taken time with their comments. There's a lot of detail there about how the comments are addressed. So I hope you've had a chance to look at the document. Our goal is to use the initial screening criteria that hopefully are approved today, tomorrow. We need to get moving on this project. And we're to do the initial screening, apply the initial screening criteria to 2 projects recommended in the DP. That's Tech Memo. I'm not there yet. I'm sorry.
As you say, that's fine.
But it's important to get 1A approved, which is the goals, objectives, and performance measures, because Tech Memo 1B is based on that. So, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair. If there are any questions.
So, just a question. Let the record show that Ms. Hetzo has joined us, please. Generally, when we do the comments, when we have the citizens' comments, question is whether we go through them individually or whether we just page by page in the past.
Done it both ways.
We have.
So sometimes if they're not too in-depth, we get to approve them in months.
I've read through them all, as far as where some of the changes, the modifications to some of the language, and then where a lot of them are going to be, I saw a lot of the comments as they'll be moved forward for policy, because there are more overriding policies, so you said, to the implementation chapter. So it's a question for the committee as to how we want to go through these comments.
Madam Chair, may I add one more thing? Excuse me. One of the goals for this was to make the goals and objectives more measurable. As you know, MAP 21 requires us to have an objectives-driven, performance-based approach. The goals and objectives in the 2035 MTP are good goals and objectives, but they tend to be have too many issues in one goal and objective to make it workable. in some cases, there are 6 issue areas in one goal, and there's a lot of duplication. This tech memo is the result of looking at the 2035 comp plan versus 2035 goals and objectives, and trying to tighten them up so that it's easier to develop performance measures for each objective. So I just wanted to, if they seem a little abbreviated, that's why.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? I did like, there's one change that I thought was a very good clarification as far as, I know it was made through, at least I'm pretty sure it was documented. There's a lot of paper. I know there was a comment about parking and adding parking management in there, and I thought that was a good addition as far as the, that modification. And I know that there was modification to the language regarding, taking away protecting the environment, and rather than saying that, rather than respect, it was protect, preserve, and enhance the natural, environment. I thought that was a good, and then the equity of all users, that addition. Those were definitely, to goal 5, I thought those were definitely good changes to be made. Any other questions or comments from the committee before I open it to public comment? I'm missing my, I'm moving, is this your paper? Oh, this one's fine. Okay. I don't want to I don't want to lose that. All right, hearing no questions from the committee, I'm going to open up to public comment at this time. Are there any questions or comments on Tech Memo 1A? Anyone at all? Now I'm starting to forget how Elvie did it, though. I know, she's like, anyone at all? Hearing none? Matter is now closed. All right, matter now lies with the committee.
Move to approve Tech Memo 1A.
Do we have a second?
Second, but is it just to forward it to the policy committee?
No, this is for approval.
Oh, I'm just reading the,
Pretty sure.
oh, okay.
Yeah, the idea is that the TAC will approve all of these technical memos. Those will get absorbed into the creation of the actual MTP. So when the public document, the actual MTP gets before the policy committee, they'll approve all this, but the TAC will approve the tech memos individually. So they'll approve this
As part of the public
Okay,
hearing.
all right.
for the entire thing here.
Yeah, correct.
Hmm?
Okay.
Excuse my nose.
So you're still seconding?
Still second.
Okay.
What was your?
Just checking.
Can you please say what you just said again? What about 1A?
What I just said was the TAC approves the technical memos.
Yes.
And then the technical memos get used to create the public hearing draft. And when it becomes the public draft before the policy committee, they will approve everything, but they don't approve this part of it. The TAC approves the technical memos.
Right.
Yes.
But,
Okay.
so the public review draft for the MTP.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was that's what I was saying, yes. Are there any objections to the approval of Tech Memo 1? Hearing none. That is. All right, the next item before us is the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Tech Memo 1E. This is the screening criteria.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, that's included. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is the other half of Tech Memo 1A. It's the screening criteria, and it includes initial screening criteria, that we're going to be using hopefully tomorrow to start screening projects for you. It's a first cut, first look at projects to see if there are any outliers, any unusual projects that really are not worthy of our consideration at this time. But everything else will get, everything is going to be scored. So for this item, you have a memo, and you have the revised Tech Memo 1B with track changes that include staff's recommendations for changes based on a lot of the comments that we received. We had a lot of good comments. And then you have the comment response summary. This item was out for public review starting in May 22nd, and it went all the way through to July 14th. It kept being extended. So this document has actually had 2 solid months of public review. We had 95 comments received from 6 citizens: Anchorage Citizens Coalition, Rabbit Creek Community Council, and 4 municipal staff. I can go through all the changes, but there are a lot of them. We feel that, and this also includes staff edits, but we carefully weighed all the recommendations, thoughtfully weighed them, and we did make many edits based on that. So I hope you've had a chance to look at this, because we do need to use them at least the initial screening criteria beginning tomorrow.
It might be helpful at least to go through. I know that we had some minor tweaks the first time this came through.
Yes.
And I went through the document and I saw some of those changes. I saw that some of the verbiage had some tweaks to it as far as these criteria go, but it might not hurt to go through kind of the rationale of some of these. I mean, when you look at the tables, it's not, I don't think that it's too significant. I guess I do have specific questions.
Absolutely.
I did have for the, when you're looking at the prioritization for non-motorized projects. Sorry, I was looking, I guess that was under, that was removed from. No, I did page 13, but I was looking at something else. So yes, I was looking at table 2-6 on page 13. I had a question. It looks like there was an item in here for inclusion in plans and also community support, and that both of those were completely removed. And I was looking at kind of the fact of, I guess we didn't have for transit projects or road projects, whether or not there was community support as one of those considerations. So was it for consistency across the different areas?
Yes, Madam Chair. And actually, those are captured in the first cut in the initial screening criteria, so we thought it was redundancy.
Okay, that's what I thought as well. That's why I was flipping back, because it looks like it's in the first as far as level of community impacts, deliverability, whether or not there's community concerns is covered in the first.
Yes.
Okay, and I was just making sure when I saw that they were being removed, that it was for that purpose. So, clarifying that. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee on the screening criteria?
I have a comment about in the table of contents. Table 2-3 is called Draft 2040 NCP Scenario Model Run Evaluation Criteria, but on the actual table, it's not labeled as such. It looks like it was just maybe blanked out, that little part scenario.
I think it was the coloring.
Maybe the colors.
I think that's the coloring,
Oh, okay.
the check, because if you see the big
No, that's like-
blank spot in between here,
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I think that there is purple text in there.
it's just impossible to see.
It's
so-
black light.
There we go.
Sorry.
Just to make sure it is included.
page 10, table 2-3, the title of it, see it's all blank right here. We did change it, it's just not showing up in the track changes. You can kind of see something.
Yeah, it's not helping, it's the.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
I did have, I guess, a minor, table 2-1 on page 7. The footnotes are so large that the deliverability section gets cut off to the next page. So when I was looking at it, I said significant community concerns and or significant negative, and I was like, negative what? And then I flipped and was like, oh, financial impacts MTP, okay. So it's just more of an editing thing of.
So when we actually accept all the changes, it will fix.
Fix everything.
We checked that before because we knew somebody would comment.
I
We did
get it,
verify.
because yeah, the track change, I have to do the same thing whenever I'm editing a document. It's like, what did we change? How does it look? What does it change? How does it look? I did like the fact that you decided just to use TSM, TDM, and TOD and not spell them out in the table, because it makes the table
Yeah.
that big, so. Any other questions or comments?
I had a question about section 2-2, scenario development evaluation. I had made a comment about how we do the alternatives evaluation and making it clear to the public, because this section starts out talking about the model results. There's a lot of projects that aren't going through the model. How do we weight those? It addresses it that it's going to be considered, but I don't think it's clear to the public, and sometimes not even to me, how that's actually going to happen when you compare a pedestrian project with a road project, that one was modeled, one was not, how we actually do that. And I was hoping that it would be a little more clear in this memo, the process for that.
Well, through the chair, we don't actually model pedestrian projects.
Right.
And they actually are they have their own pot of money, and so they will be, they are a separate group of projects. But what this is trying to get at is that after we do the deficiency analysis in Tech Memo 2, you'll see that we're not going to do business as usual. We're not going to just look at road projects. And I think this is what, it's in here, it's maybe not be called out that well, but we're going to be looking at everything we've heard so far from the charrette process also. And we can model roadway projects and transit projects. But we also are going to be taking in a lot of public input at that stage. So, let's see, the graphic in the beginning, it kind of shows the process. On page 4, this is part art and part science. So, we're going to take all these projects and we're going to put them through a filter of the goals and objectives, right? To make sure that everything that we're considering is consistent with the goals and objectives. And that's basically what the initial screening is. It's very broad brush. It's not the final screening, but we just want to make sure that we're staying true, that we're being consistent with the goals and objectives. So then we're going to be looking at, we have a base case. If we do nothing, if we do absolutely nothing from what's already been committed and planned, programmed, and then we're going to create some scenarios. This is the art part. With public involvement, we have a charrette coming up. It's been moved back from September to November now. We're going to have a 3-day charrette. It's an intensive exercise. We're going to invite the public. We're going to be talking about transit and land use integration. We're going to have people focus groups on bike and ped projects, focus groups on transit specifically too. And so we'll take all that back and we'll take a step back and look at look at what we've heard, right? And try to package some different things different scenarios, different mixes of projects and strategies and solutions that reflect what we believe we've heard from the public. And we're gonna have these, we're gonna build some scenarios. We're gonna actually bring, I may be off topic, but we're actually gonna bring back to this committee what we've heard from the charrette. And we're going to bring back to you some concepts that we have, that the contractor HDR will put together for you to consider before we do any modeling at all. We want to make sure that we get the ideas, we want to get the community goals, community values right, and ask you all to weigh in on that, and the public. We're going to put everything out. We're going to put these concepts out for public review before we do any modeling. The model can only tell us, as I'd like to say again, is it's only there for congestion management, but we have so much more we have to look at. And that's really where it's, you know, it's messy. It's a messy process.
So Bart, to clarify your question, are you asking how the transit and non-motorized projects are being weighed, or?
In between, if you look at the graphic,
Yeah.
the scenario model run evaluation and the prioritization of projects,
Yes.
somewhere in there is a step that you weigh projects that were not modeled against projects that were modeled to prioritize them in the MTP.
That's part of it.
And I think your explanation included some of that, but it's not clear in this memo that all that's going to happen. It's just that staff will look at it, I guess is my concern.
Well, that's basically what happens. That is exactly what happens. And
Taking some of what you said and refining and putting into the memo may help explain kind of what's the process, is kind of what he's getting at.
If it's addressed more in Tech Memo 2 or somewhere that there's the process that's outlined, if you talked about the shipment and everything else that's going on,
Yes.
it's going above and beyond, it's just that this is labeled specifically scenario model run evaluation and goes right into prioritization. And in the section where you talk about looking at other modes and alternatives is also in the model run section. And it starts off, based on the model run results, projects will be considered and assessed based on. So it's just, it seems like it's very model dependent, and I know that it's not,
Yes.
because I know the process, but it seems like it is.
Well, I see where you're talking, because you're saying scenario development, it talks about the model run, and it's not until you get to, the prioritization part says, to avoid unfairly prioritizing one over the other, that they're all going to be scored separately. The last sentence, as part of the process, consideration of including all modes as well as consistency with comprehensive plan, FT goals and objectives and land use plan anchored by some mobility study. I guess, the question is how are we going to compare things that are being modeled with those that are not? But the scenario development, maybe this is where to clarify it. The scenario development is, like you said, the model itself is for roadways
yes,
alone, level of service, congestion management.
yes.
So maybe when you're looking at the scenario development, it needs to be clear that that scenario development is for roadway projects only.
Well, actually, scenario development is for everything. We're going to take, before we do any modeling, we're going to take these mixes of projects.
Okay.
And I had a thought and it left me. I'm sorry, it's important.
Well, I don't know how you're going to pull, this is, right now, it's just now getting to the point where we really are defining level of service for bikes and pedestrians. Measuring that is
Oh, that's
not,
what you
not,
reminded me.
not the easiest at this point, so
Yes.
we're not to that point. So as you're comparing kind of the effects on congestion of one scenario to another, the addition or removal of a bike trail is not something that can easily be modeled to show whether or not it's going to have an impact on congestion at this point.
Right, but, so you are exactly right, Madam Chair, Susan, but, so, level of service, There isn't, in the adopted 2035 MTP right now, there is a policy to look at different areas of town to see if they might have different levels of service for different parts of town. And that feeds into what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be layering the deficiency analysis with the land use planning, transit supportive corridors and TOD and densities with the headways in transit. I really do agree that this needs more explanation, but before we do any modeling, we're going to look at that map and we're going to say, oh, you know, maybe before we thought a road project would work in this area, but hold on, this is a town center we're talking about. Maybe we want to look at accepting a lower level of service in this part of town, maybe not along the whole corridor. And that's going to inform the solution strategies that we come up for that part of town. It's going to be, we've never done this before. This is brand new. We've never done this before. We have the benefit of having the new land use plan map and the map that are just on the verge of being adopted. We feel honor bound to use that, and everybody's accepted the fact that we're going to be using that for this next update. So this is going to be probably the most integrated way of approaching our scenario development that we've ever done in the past. Usually we look at road projects, we do our modeling, we look at road projects only, and then we look at, you know, everything else. This time we're taking a new approach, and we're looking at maybe this town center, we want to do more walkable, right? Maybe we are going to have a totally different set of ideas now for these certain areas and transit supportive corridors. Maybe not along the whole corridor. I do agree that we could probably have a better description in here. And I don't know how long it needs to be, unless you would be comfortable with our agreeing to having this more fleshed out in Tech Memo 2, which is the deficiency analysis. Because after the deficiency analysis is the step that it does say in here, there are two sentences that make sense. So scenarios after the model results, and that means the deficiency analysis. Scenarios will be considered and assessed based on the improvement the project makes to the transportation system. But, so, I think we could clarify the process a little better in here and the steps that we're going to take. The fact that we're not going to even develop any scenarios until we take the information we've heard from the public back to the public. We want the public to help design various scenarios. And I think that's what's missing in here, is the scenario design, what's even going to be considered in the first place. There's going to be public feedback. You all are going to help us with that.
So I have a question for you, Bart. So, I mean, as we're looking at this right now, it's in front of us to review and approve Tech Memo 1B, and you have a question regarding kind of the process and the verbiage associated with it. This is just something I'm throwing out here. Looking at the screening criteria and what we have for the screening criteria that they need to move forward with. I mean, when you're looking at approving screening criteria, perhaps adding additional information into the text.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with fleshing this explanation out later, because I do not have a problem with the criteria.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the committee before I open it to public comment? Are there any questions or comments from the public on Tech Memo 1?
One quick question.
Please state your name for the record, please.
I'm calling the Citizens Advisory Committee. Craig, I thought I heard that in the Tech Memo I guess the first one we were discussing, that the TAC would approve those goals and objectives, and then it would be put into another document later that would have a lot of the results based on the analysis to go to the policy committee, and that they would approve those goals and objectives. And I was wondering, is the same process going to be used on the overall system level criteria and then the specific project screening?
I believe the plan is that these tech memos are all what are gonna be used to build the public hearing draft later on, and the public review draft later on. So they're all, you could use the term conditionally approved now, because the policy committee is the one who approves the entire thing later on. Does that answer that?
Well, I mean, just one concern, if the policy committee, for whatever reasons, decides there are some of the specific project ranking criteria, or even some of the overall selection that you're doing, where you do the first cut on the project, some make it, some don't. If there's any, later on, if there's problems with some of those with policy committee members, is that gonna require some changes, or is it just gonna be an iterative process like that?
Excuse
Go
me,
ahead.
through the chair. Mr. Tully, we are going to take everything from the sherbet, including the scored projects, the scoring of the projects, to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and also to the public, right? We're going to put all that out for the public to look at, and that includes the policy committee. We're not going to ask we're going to ask for feedback from the policy committee, but the process is that the TAC is going to approve these initial documents.
I think his question really is, though, I guess, if the policy committee at some point decides that we're out to lunch, I'm trying to say, the technical advisory committee, where they don't agree with the decisions that we've made and what has been moved forward with us, when they get the public hearing draft, that it's incorporated all of the different tech memos and is now presenting it, is there a possibility that they will come back and make revisions and changes to the decisions that were made previously?
Well, Madam Chair, they've had an opportunity to look at the criteria. We've asked them to please provide comments or a resolution, whatever they wish to do, and they did not provide any comments. So I do think the next step is going to be very critical with when we start to look at alternatives and the project scoring, because everybody knows that certainly the policy committee. You're exactly right. We don't want to get to the end of this without having seen these things as we go along. So we don't want to have to remodel anything. That's why we're doing a lot of work up front to try to include more people, the public, the policy committee. We're not going to ask them to approve. We need to get their direction. We're going to ask them for their specific direction, though, for specific projects or solution strategies, or they may know more than we do about a certain road or a certain district of town that won't work for some reason that we don't know about. And I think you're right. I think it's wisdom to include more people up front.
I guess specifically, my experience with the previous process of going through here, through this, we did a very similar process previously, that all of these tech memos were approved at this level, consolidated, moved forward. Were there questions and need for clarification at the policy level when it went there? Absolutely. Were there complete revisions and removals of things? I don't remember significant modifications, but it's called the policy committee for a reason, and you're never going to remove the political warrants from that level. And sometimes there are agendas of individual members or different, questions and considerations that come up that sometimes are supported by the entire group and may be bona fide, and sometimes it's one individual member. And since there are also committees that has to have a certain number of votes before, it can be overturned. And I guess in my experience, it's going to be something. I don't think it's going to be anything that comes through left field that surprises us.
Well, and the criteria are fairly, it's not like there's new criteria in here that have just come out of the blue. There's a lot of it is very familiar.
Yeah.
Just one follow-up, did they approve though the socioeconomics, the employment, the growth in employment, the population? Okay, so those base socioeconomic parameters, the policy committee has adopted.
The model was approved in 2015. for those assumptions?
15, 16.
The assumptions were approved. Staff was directed through a resolution to use the model by the policy committee, so they told us this is what you will use, and we move forward with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the public? Hearing, please state your name for the record.
Sure, I'm Bob French, also a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee. I know from a previous TAC meeting that there was some concern made about the inability to model between, say, things like the commuter rail and the transit aspects of this and how they could also affect the level of services. And maybe I'm just asking, is there likely to be any changes in the model, or will it strictly be vehicle-based and not take into account some other alternate modes of transportation? So that's a question.
Well, through the chair, thank you for your comment. We'll look at vehicles, including transit vehicles. And we don't model, it doesn't model, except for a mode split. It does apply a mode split where you can see, but those figures, I think they're actually based on national values. So it's not exactly derived from local information. I think that's right. Is that right, Craig?
I'm not sure.
I think that's right.
Okay. Can I interject for a moment?
Yes.
All right, with my experience with running scenarios and doing evaluations, if there was going to be a scenario that included something like light rail, you would have an assumption, I mean, really everything's based on, it's an educated guess. You would have an assumption of how many vehicles are going, how many vehicles you would pull off the road due to commuter rail being there. So you'd have how many people are going to start, the assumption of how much traffic you are gonna, and so your evaluation may not have commuter rail in there specifically because it's not gonna show the rail line sort of thing, but it would have a reduced volume on those corridors that would benefit from the use of commuter rail. So while the model itself doesn't have those rail modes in it, there are ways to, I guess, effectively guess what those impacts are going to be based on, like you said, regional assumptions, and looking at other areas of what that scenario would entail. So,
I have inquired about, I know that the railroad doesn't have a commuter rail project right now, but, they do take traffic off the roads for transit, for the tourism that they provide. And I have talked with our contractor about that, and I think that's something that we need to address. So that is, taking all those people on those trains that you see would be on the road if it weren't for the railroad, right?
You look at it from our perspective. Well, as an example, last February, I went to Seattle midweek to go to an event downtown Seattle. Get off at the airport, get on the light rail, go downtown, do my thing. A couple days later, go back the other way. The problem, I think, that a lot of people have with the service that we run is it's a tourist train, it's, go drink beer, go have fun, things like that. The reality is those people are, of the 100, give or take, boats that come to South Central Alaska, 90% of them go to either Whittier or Seward, Anchorage, Kissimmee. Those people have to get from where they land to an airport, or to an airport, to a boat, or from the boat to Denali or wherever else on God's green earth they're going. And those trips aren't any different. Just as my trip got counted as probably transit, even though from the airport to downtown, I only did it once. I won't do it again for another month or two. They are, if you look at under, the FTA stuff and so forth, so public, regularly scheduled public transportation. It's not state transit. And so when we're considering these things from a modeling standpoint, the fact of the matter is we're moving 500,000 people in 4 months that would otherwise be on the road. And so we do have to take that into consideration when we're looking at our overall transportation. And we do have a pilot project sitting on the shelf waiting for somebody to fund as far as doing more commuter type operations in the valley. The issue is Where's the new? Sort of like Kabata, but we'll do that soon.
So I don't know if we answered your question in the sense it is possible, I guess, to incorporate those assumptions into the model, and you have to document all of those assumptions. If you're saying, you know, 1 out of every 4 cars will be removed from the road, or however many you would say for a commuter rail type operation. I mean, we really, because we have data, we have the existing data without commuter rail, you know, you'd have to kind of do the guess. Same goes like when he's talking about the number of tourists we have. We have data for what the existing system looks like. Let's say that all of a sudden we wanted to run a scenario where all of those people that are currently using the railroad are now going to be driving personal occupancy vehicles or are in buses. You know, there is a way to kind of transfer those trips, I think, onto the road, onto or off of the roadway system that is within the model, based upon those assumptions and whatever data you're going to put into it.
Yeah, I guess I was just really trying to say that if you have a model that doesn't allow you to add inputs based on things like commuter rail or something like that, you really have a defective model.
Well, I think our model is pretty, I mean, like you said, you have mode split, you have the ability to do that sort of thing. I mean, it's consistent with pretty much most models that are used nationwide.
Even the most rudimentary model, it's basically a black box modal split approach where you've got people entering or exiting the system at discrete points and magic happens. They're not accounted for in between those points. Right? And so, you know, not knowing exactly what the community's dealing with, they would probably handle it that way. And that, you know, how they get from point A to point B, whether it's helicopter, railroad, digging a tunnel, whatever, it's just considered outside the network.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess just again, a question on the model. I think it does have the capability though of looking at alternative, like you're saying here, different alternatives and how different levels of service would impact the amount of ridership, say if you wanted to model to express bus service to the valley, something like that. And it was done in the last couple of models where there was a whole project, the express bus along the Big Highway. So, but assuming you can, if you want to really have a more robust transit system, you just make some assumptions about what level of service you're going to provide, and the model will, depending on how much service you provide you some indication of how much you could draw off of the highway single occupant vehicles into transit.
Yes. It's true.
Yeah, I was just, didn't want to make it sound like there was nothing we were going to do with transit.
Yeah, no, there are possibilities. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, the matter lies with committee. Yeah, no.
Move to approve that mail to be with,
One B. With the,
Incorporating the changes, what Bart talked about.
So when you say incorporating the changes, the additional verbiage we were discussing, describing, okay.
Madam Chair, could you please ask Mr. Rudolph, sorry, to clarify what he was at, that I thought he said he was okay on not making changes to the document, but doing it in one, in.
Yeah, if you want to flesh it out in another memo or in tech memo too, that's okay too.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear, thank you.
Do you want to see those changes? Yeah.
so you're fine.
Yeah, I don't know if that needs to be part of the motion or not, but they're going to address it in tech memo too.
It wouldn't have to be,
Okay.
he was doing it if you wanted it addressed in this one.
so, then move to approve tech memo 1B.
Okay. Do I have a second? approval of tech memo 1B? Hearing none, we are so approved. Do we need to let the record show that Jerry was not here for the vote? Or, okay.
I say yes.
Okay. Just so it's clear, he wasn't here when we were discussing the motion. All right, the next item before us is a resolution withdrawing support from the Connect Arm Crossing Project, KAC.
Madam Chair, this is a resolution at the request of one of our policy committee members. Basically wants to achieve two goals with this resolution. One is to not consider the Kindergarten Crossing project as part of the 2040 MTP update. And two is to make sure that we do not utilize that project when we do our modeling effort. So those were his two requests. So this has been drafted to achieve those aims. I know there are a couple minor edits. I have three of them here to run through. And there may be more from the committee itself, but I'll just throw these out. Under the first whereas, where it says, whereas the significant decreases in federal and state funding, that should just read significant decreases in state funding, because the last several years in terms of our allocation, I believe the state's allocation of those federal funds have stayed about the same, if not risen. So we did the federal and then at the end of that sentence, it should say, of all sources of funds available, insert the word for. So it should be sources of funds available for those improvements. So between available and those. And then just a clarification in the next whereas, it should read, whereas the governor has removed any funding for the Kindergarten Crossing project for the foreseeable future and has closed the project's Anchorage offices instead of the word there. Just to clarify that that's what we're talking about, closing the project's Anchorage offices. Those are the three suggested edits that I have. We have it.
Any questions from the committee?
So the removal of the support for the project was just codified by removing it from the analysis for the NTP 2040, and that's it.
Yeah, I guess so. Mr. Constant wanted to make sure that that the policy committee was coming out with a clear indication of not supporting this project being in the MTP and not supporting the project itself. So,
Not supporting the project itself seems a little problematic without going. From the department's perspective, we went through a fairly long and arduous process. And I understand the assembly members' desire to be representing that part of the community that we saw the most pushback. But having been at the DOT for many decades now, changes in administration often precipitate changes in direction on major projects like this. And it very well could be that with the new mayor and new governor, this thing fires up again. So that aside, we certainly don't mind it being removed from the analysis. The department doesn't, as far as the MTP goes. But advocating for the removal of all support at for this project forever and ever had a technical advisory committee without going through a public process seems a little disingenuous. And I'm not sure really that the public involvement process that we have really supports that action at this committee level without having gone through the process.
I guess one just clarification too, and I asked Craig about this earlier myself. This is us reviewing the 4-H policy committee for their approval. This is not us even putting our stamp of approving it, recommending it for their approval. This is us reviewing it. So if we want to make changes to it or recommend changes to the group, I guess we'll make those recommendations. The final decision of what is entailed in this and whether or not it gets approved falls to the policy committee. So,
Okay.
just that clarification. Yes, Mr. Lindenberg.
Well, and I guess I had a similar question as Ms. Leonard, in so much as we're really looking at this from a technical standpoint, not a political standpoint. Does he even need us? I mean, outside of us deciding that we aren't going to model it, which is really what our function is to model it, make recommendations based on the model. You know, any other sort of statements, whether it's supported or not supported, he doesn't really need us for that, I don't think.
Political action.
Yeah, that's a
That's
political
what this
action.
is. It's not a
Well,
technical action.
It's a political action, basically telling us what to technically do, which we can technically do whatever, but we're going to provide him an analysis without color as far as what.
Maybe the title should read, withdraw support insofar as removing it from the modeling assumptions, or.
So I had some proposed changes to the title,
Okay.
because when you read the rest of the resolution, I guess no other verbiage within the resolution talks about withdrawing support for the project. It mentions the resolves. Now be it therefore be resolved, the AMATS Policy Committee hereby confirms the Connect Garden Crossing project will remove the modeling effort for the 2040 MTP, and be it further resolved that they not include the Connect Garden Crossing project in the 2040 MTP update. So with that language down there, the title, I guess the upper part of it, if it was, say, a resolution of AMATS to remove the Connect Garden Crossing project from the modeling assumptions for purposes of the development of the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update.
As a point of order, should we at least move to approve for discussion and then start bleeding right into comments?
I was throwing out recommendations of that if we're going to talk about changing title, I think there's some very easy modifications. And if it's so chosen by the policy committee to reject such changes and revise language, that is upon them. So, but I guess for clarification, when I'm reading through what the actual results are, revising the title makes it more consistent overall with what the message says.
Well, with that in mind, I will move.
Well, we haven't opened it for public
Yeah.
comment.
Oh, okay.
We're still discussing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Any other discussion points? Any other questions or comments? Okay. It's now open to the public. Are there any questions or comments on this resolution? Please state your name for the record.
Lois Epstein, and I know many of you as a former member of the AMATS Technical Committee. I'm now here as a member of the public, and I want to say that I support removal of the Connect Bridge from the model, and appreciate the discussion the committee just had. And I guess I would just respectfully add that there is a little bit of public engagement involved through this process, and there's an opportunity for public comment. That's why I'm here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, the matter lies with me.
Is it my turn now? Now it's your turn.
Now it's your turn.
I'm going to make a motion to approve,
I guess we don't have to, technically
Yes.
don't have to approve. but-
well, to whatever we do.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a motion to do whatever we do.
Forward into the policy.
To forward it, yeah.
To incorporate Craig's comments, but further, just to make my life simple, and to save a bunch of further motions that we have to do, I'm going to strike after AMATS under the title, withdrawing support for the Connect Arm Crossing, in parentheses, KC project and instead of that, just put the word to, and make, rather than removing, just remove. And then it does not address the support issue, it's simply saying we're just not going to include it as part of the 24th modeling efforts per the rest of the whereas's and therefores.
Can I make a friendly amendment?
Sure.
Just, if you remove the Connect Arm Crossing project, it doesn't mention again in the title,
okay.
it says it.
Okay,
So-
we'll just, maybe we'll take that part and put it, instead of it, we'll just put Connect Arm Crossing part.
Okay.
Is that confusing enough?
Yeah. I have it written here on paper, if anybody needs to see what it looks like. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Madam Chair, would you mind reading to restating the changes?
So the title should now read, a resolution of AMATS to remove the Knick Arm Crossing KAC project from the modeling assumptions for purposes of the development of the 2040 Metropolitan. Just so we know, Metropolitan
It's misspelled.
is, it's either got a lowercase L in it or it's misspelled. Transportation plan and MTP update. So the statements withdrawing support for was removed and removing it was removed.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
Once again, do I have a second?
Second.
I know we have 3 seconds. I heard Mr. Young first. Are there? What? I did. You said second, didn't you? I thought I heard you, Mr. Van Hove, and Hanson all together.
Oh, you're right.
Okay. I heard them all.
The majority, just based on the second.
I know. All right, but I still have to, are there any objections to forwarding to policy committee with those modifications? All right, hearing none, we are so moved. Thank you. So item 6A was removed from the agenda, so the next item is the 24 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an extravaganza for the NTP today. Hope we're not boring you. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank the committee for approving Technical 1B, and with this we can move forward and start scoring projects tomorrow, and it will continue through August. So Technical number 2 is the deficiency analysis, and we had planned to bring that to you today, but we had quite a few comments that we really needed to go back to the contractor to help us respond to them. We had 95 comments, and we intend to bring it back to you in September for approval.
Can I interject?
I beg your pardon?
Can I interject? Are we going to have a work session?
That's a good question.
I just asked.
Would you like a
if
work
you had
session?
95 comments, I think we're going to need the opportunity to go through some of those and understand what that's going to be before we have to go through.
And they were good comments, and they came from 3 members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. It was out for public review and comment for 2 weeks, but we received no other comments in those. And I think, okay, that's a good question. Thank you.
All right, really quickly, for purposes of setting up a work session, would you like that, a week before the TAC? What's your? When would you like a work session? It's over by Art's feet.
Is it? Okay.
It's like a pen, part of her pen.
Todd's breaking his pen
Oh,
next to me,
Todd.
trying to throw it across. I'm sorry, Aaron, I was slightly distracted. You were saying?
Just so staff can have an idea, when would you like the work session to take place? The week of the TAC meeting, the week before?
Pre-scheduled.
I guess that's tough, because how in-depth are the comments, and do you think we're gonna have to go through and have some pretty significant revisions? When is our next meeting?
14.
The 14th.
Really make it, that's not going early. If we do our usual Tuesday afternoon soiree.
Problem with the 5th is right after, that's Labor Day, right after Labor Day, we could.
You won't have quorum for work session.
We wouldn't, yeah. I guess that.
We have to have it posted on the 7th.
Yeah, you have to have it posted by the 7th.
So it'd be good to have a work session before we post everything in case you guys have more changes, I guess.
That's the end of August.
Yeah, so the week of the 29th or 28th. I don't know if you want to do a dual poll, Craig, but.
Through the chair, that I'm not sure. We'll just have to talk also with the contractor to see if they have enough time to respond to all the comments.
Okay. Yeah.
Should we get back with you or do a poll or something?
When you know better, when you will be prepared for a work session, I think, yes,
Okay.
do a doodle poll and we'll have to figure it out.
Thank you. Chair. We did have one issue, an administrative issue. We were only able to issue a notice to proceed for a portion of the contract because we had a TORA that said that we would take on 50% of the local match, which was a change in the contract. So we had enough money to go only to a certain point, and then Mr. Lyon identified the match, the additional match required, and it took some time, though, to get it adopted, appropriated by the Assembly, the budget change. So it took 3 weeks to do that, and part of that was because there was a staff change, and it was beyond our control. So that is going to wind up having an effect to push the project out a little bit, the schedule. So instead of having the charrette in September, it's now going to be, it's tentatively planned through November 1, 2, and 3. November 1st, the first week of November. So that's all I have for that, and we'll have more schedule updates for you next time.
Okay. So it was originally planned, when was it planned, in September?
Mid-September. So we're looking at, so we're losing, because of that one thing that lasted 3 weeks, the repercussions are that we're actually going to look at maybe a 3-month change in the schedule. But I think we have a year scheduled for adoption, the adoption and approval process. So we wanted to give ourselves plenty of time for that, and I think we'll be able to make it up. And if we don't, we'll beg for forgiveness from FHW.
I think we'll be able to.
So glad you're here.
I know.
Heads up. Schedules are changing. But we'd rather have a good public process than try to rush it through and not take these concepts. This is a new step we added actually since the original schedule. We're taking these concepts that come out of the charrette back to the public to make sure, did we get it right? And I think that's defensible. I hope. I hope FHW agrees.
Any questions or comments on the update? November isn't hunting season. It's past, isn't it? I know.
It's
Well,
just
no.
after Halloween.
I was pondering today to myself as we were looking at training for other things about when is a good time of year for training. And I could pretty much eliminate almost every month for someone in my department. So I'm like, pretty much you just have to pull off the Band-Aid and do it sometime because it's going to be bad. But I was wondering if, whether having the charrette in mid-September, everybody going back to school, time frame, hunting, everything like that, it may be better having it in November, in early November, rather than September time frame. So it may work out to benefit you in the long run. So that's my only comment. Any other comments? Are there any questions or comments from the public that's here on this item? Hearing none. Are there any other committee comments for the good of the order?
As of last Friday, after some 18 months of deliberation, God help us all, we have a split under the city.
For the 50th year of seven?
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so despite my personal feelings in the matter, I'm sure we'll have a joint press release and everything's great in Leadville. And we'll be, I think Craig's already got our changes, I'm sure he's got a bunch of his own.
We'll have an amendment next month from for administrative modification.
Despite
Despite my personal feelings.
I'd almost wiped it from my memory. Depends on. I have to purge
The accountants have
periodically or
purged
else.
it from our books, which, made my life interesting.
Any other committee comments? Stay safe. Okay. Are there any public comments at this time?
Move to adjourn.
I know. I appreciate everybody sticking with us. We are adjourned at 3:49 p.m.